So today's content framing question is, what is the central message of Grandfather's Journey? We've answered these kinds of questions many a times. Now for our 2 craft questions today, and actually we're not going to get to the second one until tomorrow, but the first one is, how does listening for keywords work? And our second craft question that we will answer tomorrow, I promise, is, how does grouping related information together work? All right, so before we begin answering our content framing question today, what is the central message of Grandfather's Journey? I want us first to take a trip back down memory lane of Module 1, the Sea, and Module 2, Outer Space, because we've read a selection of text where we figured out what the central message or essential meaning of each of those texts were. So we're going to look back to see the different strategies that we've learned so far to figure out what a central message or how to identify a central message. So in Module 1, the C, how did we find a central message or essential meaning? We looked at the illustrations and repeated language in Amos and Boris and the fantastic undersea life of Jacques Cousteau. We also looked at repeated ideas in Shark Attack and Giant Squid to help us identify a central message. And in a moment, we will dive deeper into specific central messages that we've discussed before in some of those texts. Now for Module 2, Outer Space. How did we find essential message, essential meaning of a text in Module 2? Well, similarly to Module 1, we looked at the illustrations and repeated language to help us identify the central message in Starry Messenger. We also looked at the beginnings and the endings of our text, like Moonshot and One Giant Leap, to help us identify a central message. We also looked at repeated language that helped us identify a central message in Zathura. And we also looked at the beginning and ending of Zathura, especially noticing how the character Walter changed from the beginning of Zathura to the end to help us identify another central message in the text. So after reviewing the 4 strategies we have learned so far to identify the central message, what the author is trying to teach us, include the following. Notice the repeated illustrations, notice repeated ideas and language, notice beginnings and endings, and noticing how characters change. Looking more specifically at the 4 different strategies that we just talked about to determine the central message or essential meaning of a text. First, we are going to be looking at repeated illustrations. So if you remember Amos and Boris, here I have a picture of an illustration from the text. It often shows the 2 friends together to express the central message that friendship is important. Another central message we've also talked about in this book was about how little friends can be of big help. Now, also in Module 2 for Starry Messenger, it showed us several images of Galileo looking at the moon and stars to express the essential meaning that Galileo's curiosity helped him learn about the moon. Here you see that Galileo is here looking up in his telescope at the moon. And from this page as well, from Starry Messenger, we noticed that Galileo is the baby with the stars on its blanket. Okay. Now for our second strategy, noticing repeated ideas and language. In Shark Attack by Kathy Dubowski, right, the essential meaning was that sharks are dangerous but important. And so I want you to remember back to this book that we read in Module 1 about how scientists study sharks in order to learn more about how they can help us humans. I remember we talked about how sharks can heal very quickly, and so scientists and doctors wanted to use that to further drive their research on how we can utilize their cells and things like that. Also, we talked about how their cartilage could be used to heal burn patients. And so there was a lot of different details and knowledge that we gained from this book, but overall, we learned that sharks are dangerous, as we had also read about different people who die from shark attacks, but mostly just get hurt. But also understanding that they are important creatures and definitely ones that we would like to preserve in our oceanic food chain. All right. Now moving on to moonshot. So moonshot, we talked about the repeated words a lot to describe the moon. The repetition supports the essential meaning that the moon is both beautiful and dangerous. So here we have a image of 2 pages from moonshot, and if you could see, it might be a little blurry, but I'll read it out loud for you. It says, "But still ahead there is the moon, cold and quiet, no air, no life, but glowing in the sky, glowing and growing. It takes them in, it pulls them close." And we talked about in Moonshot the words cold and quiet, no air, no life, but glowing in the sky. Those words were repeated by Brian Flocka multiple times throughout this text. So that helped us realize that the moon is both beautiful and dangerous. Now, moving on to the beginnings and endings of text. Here we have the fantastic undersea life of Jacques Cousteau. So it begins and ends with an illustration of Jacques looking out at the sea. The beginning and end support the essential meaning that Cousteau was amazed by the sea's beauty. So here we have the first page of the fantastic undersea life of Jacques Cousteau. We talked about the text feature here, the text bubbles, and the quotes that the real Jacques-Yves Cousteau had said. "The sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonder forever." And we also see here that Jacques loved the sea. He spent his whole life exploring it. The ocean was the most incredible place he'd ever seen, and he wanted to share its beauty with the world. And here on the last page of our text, Jacques Cousteau loved the sea. He shared its beauty with the world so that everyone could love and cherish it too. So we see here that the beginnings and the end of this text emphasize how he loved the sea and was amazed by its beauty. And also we see in the illustration, Jacques in the ocean and Jacques in the ocean. Okay. All right. So our last strategy is noticing how characters change throughout a text. In module 1, in Amos and Boris, Amos starts out alone but ends up with a good friend. This demonstrates the central message that friendship is important. So you see here in this page, at the end of the story, Amos is able to help out Boris, and that is because of their friendship. And so we see that Amos changes from the beginning of the story when he's stranded alone and off into the ocean to travel, to at the end when he finally goes home, he's able to display his friendship to Boris by helping him out. Then in Zathura, in Module 2, we see that Walter changes from the beginning of the text to the end. So he's annoyed by Danny, his younger brother, at the beginning of the story, but he shows that by the end of the story that he does love his brother. And the change supports the central message that working together helps people appreciate one another, because throughout the game, they needed to work together in order to finish the game, in order to come back to Earth and for everything to go back to normal. And so Walter learns that he needs to get along with his brother, but also that he truly does love his brother and he wants the both of them to come back home together. And so you see here at the end of the book that their relationship has changed, and Walter is showing love to his younger brother. And so here are 4 examples of the 4 strategies that we just discussed from modules 1 and 2. And so what I want you to do is I want you to use this PDF or document to help you figure out the central message for Grandfather's Journey. I'll make this available on Google Classroom so you can take a look at it as well. All right? All right. So today I want us to go over again how to listen to keywords. And so I'm going to show you your anchor chart for keywords. I'll draw a little ear here. How to listen for. to just emphasize that we are listening for important words. Okay? So, first, how to listen for keywords. I want you to listen for changes in the speakers or readers volume. Okay? I want you to also listen for changes in the speakers or readers rate. Okay, so volume, let's see how we can draw this. Louder. Rate can be 2 to draw speed. Okay? Slowing things down, turning things fast, or really slowing things down. All right? All right. Also, you can listen for interesting words that catch your attention. For example, I noticed that some of you wrote down the word astonished or bewildered in your classwork as words that you didn't know. I also want you to recognize that those words are also interesting words that caught your attention. And there's a purpose behind why Alan Say uses those words. Okay? And finally, our last point of how to listen for keywords is listen for important words that are repeated. So this is what we kind of practiced yesterday, listening for important words that are repeated. And we are going to continue practicing listening for keywords throughout the text, but also for repeated words to figure out what the central message is of Grandfather's Journey. I'm going to just make that interesting, that are repeated. I'm going to say repeated, repeated. All right. So now that you know how to identify keywords in the text, what I want you to do is I want you to find at least 5 keywords that are found in pages 4 through 13. And again, those pages, I'm going to insert the clip of those pages being read aloud so that you can listen in and see what the keywords are. My grandfather was a young man when he left his home in Japan and went to see the world. He wore European clothes for the first time and began his journey on a steamship. The Pacific Ocean astonished him. For 3 weeks, he did not see land. When land finally appeared, it was the New World. He explored North America by train and riverboat and often walked for days on end. Deserts with rocks like enormous sculptures amazed him. The endless farm fields reminded him of the ocean he had crossed. Huge cities of factories and tall buildings bewildered and yet excited him. He marveled at the towering mountains and rivers as clear as the sky. He met many people along the way. He shook hands with black men and white men, with yellow men and red men. The more he traveled, the more he longed to see new places and never thought of returning home. So some questions that I want you to think about as you are rereading the text to find the central message of Grandfather's Journey are the following. I want you to first notice what the similar illustrations look like in the text. So how are those illustrations similar? Do the illustrations depict or show any repeated images? What words or phrases does Alan say repeat in the story? Are the repeated words or phrases related in any way? And again, these are not questions that you need to answer. These are just questions I want you to think about as you are thinking and figuring out what the central message is. What ideas do the words and phrase express or show? How are the beginning and ending of the story similar? How are they different? What ideas do you notice because of the similarities and differences? What do you notice about grandfather at the beginning of the story? How is grandfather the same or different at the end of the story? And how does what you notice about grandfather at the end of the story help you understand an important idea in the text? All right. So again, I want you to be thinking about these questions as you are rereading the text to figure out, what is Alan Say trying to teach me in Grandfather's Journey? All right, and now for your main activity of your classwork today is finally identifying the central message. So a lot of what we've discussed so far is kind of leading up to this graphic organizer. All right, so here where it says strategy, I want you to type which of the 4 strategies you are picking to help you find the central message, whether it is analyzing the illustrations and text, analyzing the repeated language, analyzing the beginning and end, or analyzing how characters change. Okay, so you can pick one of those 4, and I want you to type it right here in this strategy section. Okay. I'm going to have the graphic up here, so if you want to use it to help you, you can do that as well. You can also look back to the kind of review sheet of module 1 and 2 as well, because that will also tell you the 4 strategies, and you can always refer back to that document that is attached to this classwork to help you. Okay, now here what you are going to write is what you notice from the strategy you picked, whether that's looking at the illustrations that are repeated, the text that's repeated, the beginning and the end. And then here, kind of like your elaboration, right? Evidence, elaboration. You are going to explain why that is important, what you notice, why it's important, and how it supports the central message. And finally, here at the bottom, I want you to state, what do you think Alan Say is teaching you? Again, there is not one right answer for this because based on our own experiences and the life that we've lived, the central message may be different from me, Miss Toma, to you. Okay? So again, you're stating right here, what do you think is the lesson that Alan Say is trying to teach you in this story? And so that concludes your classwork for today. So then you also have an exit ticket that will be on Google Classroom, as well as another question set quiz. There's one more activity that I'm going to give you tomorrow instead of today, because I want to give you a little more time to do the exit ticket and your quiz. And then once we are finished with that, we will be moving on to our next text. Yay!